Tell from the beard. What is it? Is it play chime for hands raised? What? Recognize hand gestures. I think that's on there. So like what happens if I do this? Come on. Come on, AI. Come on. Come on. Fuck. Sucks. All right, whatever.
God, so embarrassing. Um,
I'm embarrassed for myself. All right. That's all been recording. I hope
rightfully so.
I,
Rightfully so.
I hope Evan puts that onto. All right. Anyway, we'll let everybody in here. And what I need to put on speaker view is on speaker view. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're having an awesome Tuesday night. Thanks for joining us for the tasting. Thanks for your patience. Uh, my dinner took longer to prepare than HelloFresh quoted, so I'm going to blame that. Also, my wife working too hard and not being here to help me with it. I mean, rich world problems, I think. Oh, yes, Doug, you have a point.
Let's be honest, Andrew. You also spent 2 minutes trying to turn on
Yeah.
your special amazing Zoom effects without any
Yeah,
luck.
which aren't working on you right now, so I love
I
that
know, I
too.
know. After all the shit talking, here I am.
Doug's hand gestures always get him somewhere special. Oh, here it comes, Doug. I think I got it. I think that I can tell that blew Tom Vanderroot's mind. I can see from here that just was like more than he can handle. Well, listen, everybody, I want to thank you for joining us on a Tuesday night in December for purchasing the kit. We have six whiskeys to taste through, seven if you count the Longrow Special Edition. And yeah, it's going to be an awesome tasting. I did forget to do the mute all trick, so Doug, you will have to unmute again in a second. But we do that just to keep the audio clean and crisp and our YouTube quality amateur. I think that's fair to say. We rarely, if ever, achieve anything above amateur on YouTube, but that's what we're going for. I'm joined by my friend and fellow Springbank Society member, whiskey fan Doug Page. Some of you may have seen him on tastings previously. Doug recently completed Springbank Whiskey School. He's been to the Campbellton Malts Festival, well, more times than I have, because I've only been one and a half times, maybe, if that even counts. Doug's saying that does not count. Uh, oh, we got another new person joining us, but I'm thrilled to have him on here because let's be honest, it would kind of suck to get somebody in Scotland to stay up until what time is it there now? 2 in the morning to host a tasting for us. Fun though it would be for all of us.
I mean, you have to imagine though, excuse me, there's at least a half dozen people up in Campbelltown going around town creating some shenanigans and tomfoolery. So, but
Mhm. It,
just
it
probably
is
not the folks
rural,
in Springbank.
rather rural Scotland, so that does make some perfect sense. So, Doug, we're going to start things. If we might as well just start things right off with a whiskey here, and we're starting things off with a Hazelburn Oloroso cask matured 8-year-old. What's interesting about this, and I don't know, I don't recall if you were on the tasting that we did with Ranald earlier in the year when he told us not to expect Hazelburn for a couple of years. And then they put an 8-year-old Oloroso into the tasting kits that they sent out to us.
I feel like that was more around some of the sort of standard 10-year-old line. I know they got rid
Hmm.
of 21 altogether. So I suspect we'll see the odd special release, but doesn't seem like they've been making a ton of it over the last few years.
No, and I think there's a gap of about 4 years, 3 or 4 years where I don't think they produced any, is the story. And I don't know, maybe that's because they were trying to, in their own quaint Springbank way, maximize the production of other spirits while only running the distillery 5 days a week, um, and not 24/7. But this is the edition we have here. This is the 8-year-old from 2025, 48.2%. It's 100% Oloroso cask. 10,500 bottles released worldwide. This, I don't think this has come in yet. Maybe it has. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's still coming. Springbank always comes in such tiny quantities, and we have to put it into ballots anyway. But this is the one we're trying, and it's matured 100% in Oloroso sherry casks. And Doug, what do you think about this whiskey on the nose?
Oh, well, I'm just getting up to speed. It's been a little bit of time off as I was under the weather. So this is my first dram in a week or two here. So
Do you blame the children's?
I mean, I always blame the children first and foremost. I love them dearly, however.
Yeah.
Let's
I
be honest.
mean, they're getting a little older, so they're less likely to come home with running noses than they used to be. But some nice kind of jujube notes on the nose, a bit of milk chocolate. It's kind of like soft candies to me.
The interesting thing for me with Springbank right now is with their recent 10-year-old sherry release, which are sort of all these finishes in different
Hmm.
sherry casks. Um, they come out pretty dark. You can tell that the casks were likely fairly wet when the spirit went
Hmm.
in. This is much more subdued with 8 years of maturation, and so there's a lovely sort of nuttiness in there, but it's a softer Oloroso than some of the big bombs that we see
Hmm.
from the market from finishes these days.
Well, I agree that I think that this is a better integration of sherry, and especially this is a full term maturation of it. Works quite well. Well, I'm gonna give it a little taste.
Do we know, did it say whether it was first fill, second fill, or just said Oloroso, I think, right?
Hmm.
So I guess some of this would have to be a refill Oloroso, just given some of the light
Possibly, but
nutty kick.
man, I mean, in the best possible way, that is a bit of a sherry bomb on the palate. Like it's not overly tannic, overly spicy, overly woody, but it's really chocolatey, loaded with dark fruit. Uh, it's got a really nice kind of balance to it, soft finish. It's milk chocolatey. And I don't normally think of Hazelburn as being the type of whiskey that you would normally think of pairing well with sherry because it's triple distilled. So it's already a little bit lighter, more delicate. A bit surprising to me that that's kind of where they've gone with this, but I think it works really well.
Well, the interesting thing is at 8 years old, you'd have to imagine they've proofed this down to 48.2% with it. But already some interesting notes in terms of not getting the sweetness. I think somebody called you a tart, which I would absolutely agree with. Uh, but I just glanced at that quickly, so I can only comment.
I've been called worse, much worse. Kevin saying I feel like this smells like a rose milk chocolate.
Mm.
It really is milk chocolatey, very soft, and it's just really nice to me. Again, these nice kind of jujube, artificial fruit, gelatinous candies. Now, Shlomo's disagreeing, not getting the sweetness. He's finding it. I think
Yeah.
he's finding it, and not me personally, tart. But either
We can
or,
agree
we'll
to
accept
disagree
either.
on that. So for me, I don't necessarily get as much of the sweetness. For me, it's much more like hazelnuts and like nougat, a little bit of like cocoa powder. I get sort of those slight sort of,
Mhm.
that rose nose that I think
Yeah.
Kevin mentioned.
So I'm not sure it's so much I find it sweet. I just find it candy. Like I find it like candy fruit flavors. Now, the palette seems to be getting bigger. It's more chocolatey. It's getting darker chocolates, moving into more leather and even some nice tobacco tones. But still, like it's very balanced. It's not over the top.
Mm.
Um, it's yeah. I, Evan and I was telling Doug before we got started, had two Uber Advent tastings to pre-record this afternoon. So this is my third tasting of the day. And what was interesting is one of the whiskeys we had in there was that Auchentoshan 88 PX, which I think a lot of people quite like. It's 1988, 29-year-old, probably bottled around 2017 or 2018, that was finished in PX sherry. And some mutual friends of ours, Doug, like Kurt's a big fan of it. And we tried it and I still really like it. But I don't like Auchentoshan in sherry because I find it just covers up the distillate. The distillate's so delicate. I've never been a fan of three wood. I'm skeptical of triple distilled whiskeys and sherry, but in this case, I quite like it.
Mm. Yeah, I think the interesting thing with the triple distilled is you need a richness in the malt, I've always felt. And so, Auchentoshan that sort of, is getting it from some of the big maltsters, doesn't have a super long fermentation on it as opposed to
No.
Hazelburn with sort of the floor malting. I get much more character out of a Hazelburn triple distilled than I do with an Auchentoshan or even some of the sort of pot stilled Irish whiskeys.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point. But I would say even in that case, I'd still rather have it like straight bourbon or a refill cask because I think we've had Hazelburn 10-year-old in some tastings in the last couple of years, and I forgot how like pretty that is and how elegant it is, but they just don't make very much of it. And this is lovely. I just, I think I would still rather see it a little more naked.
No, I think the interesting thing is Springbank is just so batchy. There was a time where some of the Hazelburn tens were certainly not my favorites, and I didn't love them. And then I feel really we're in such a sweet spot over the last sort of 6, 8 years, with some of the Springbank tens, Hazelburn 10, um, that are just lovely.
Um, Not sure how to answer this. Shlomo wants to know what I'm wearing below the desk. I mean, that's gentlemen don't tell tales out of school, Shlomo, but I'll leave it to your imagination, I suppose. Maybe that's the best place to leave it for now. Uh, should we move on to the local barley 8-year-old?
Indeed.
I'm gonna try to pull this up. I'm pulling them up as we go from the Springbank website because naturally none of these are on our website because that would just cause bedlam, and don't have any need for that. And I don't see the 8-year-old. Doug, do you know, is this a past local barley is that they've put in here?
So there was a previous 8-year-old with it, but I think this is the most recent one. Uh, Probably should know that better. I do know that this year is the first year that they've actually doubled or almost doubled the local barley production. So they
Mm,
actually did two different batches of local barley this year, with it, which is part of the reason why Hazelburn is only down to 2 or 3 weeks of production
yeah.
time.
So this is this year's according to this 58.1. Well, I had to go to Whiskey Notes, to Ruben's website in Belgium to find this. What does he say here? It was bottled in December 2024, but this was launched early in 2025. So that might add a little bit to the confusion. They used bare barley, just like in 2017. Maturation 50% bourbon, 50% sherry, which matches with the little chart they gave us. Uh, and he gave it a score, but we don't need to look at that. I think we can judge this for ourselves. Uh, what do we think of this 8-year-old local barley, which right off the bat seems a little more, quite a bit more naked than the Hazelburn we just had?
Very much so. I mean, the joke at Springbank is always the vacation is given at the level of seniority, and all of the most senior folks on the floor malting side always take their vacation when local barley is happening because you're turning it about twice as often. Regular malt you're turning every 4 hours. The local
Mm,
barley just heats up so much you're turning it every hour and a half, 2 hours. It takes you 2 hours to turn the floor in the first place. So you basically don't get a break from turning over barley for what is a 12-hour shift. Um,
mhm.
so not very much fun. It's great if you've got whiskey school around and you've got a couple of extra hands to help out, but um,
And did you weren't there for local barley week, I'm guessing.
yes, we were there we
Oh.
were there for when it was getting distilled, but we
Ah.
weren't there, thankfully, for when we had to turn it. They were back to turning regular stuff on the malting floor.
Now I don't know if this is how it works at Springbank, but I know other places you talk to where they do their own maltings, they typically don't take the malted barley that's just gone through the kiln and put it straight into the mill. Often it's rested for another, in some cases, I've heard even months before they actually put it into production. Because the idea is they like you're just going to shock it if you've gone through the germination process, you've dried it out, and then all of a sudden you put it through into production, and it's not going to give you the best profile that it potentially could. So I'm guessing even if they were just finishing distilling it, this is probably barley production that had been done, I'm guessing at least a month or two earlier.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They usually give it at least 4 to 6 weeks of rest time before they start milling it and fermenting it with it. But I have to admit, the first time I tried this, I'm enjoying this more than I think the first time I enjoyed it. There's a lovely sweetness to it and cream there that even
Mhm.
comparatively to the 8-year-old Hazelburn. Um, at first glance, I'm enjoying the local barley a little bit more.
Mhm. Well, I mean, the cereal notes on this are lovely. There's some nice honey tones. I would say there's more of a citrus fruit kind of profile to it on the nose right off the bat. But I love these local barley whiskeys, especially the younger ones, have this almost yogurty yeastiness to them too.
Yeah, even with the 50% sherry, it still feels like a pretty naked big distillate.
Hmm.
For me, there's kind of like this beautiful apple cider vinegar and sort of slight cinnamon note,
Hmm.
almost like walking into a house with a little bit of apple cider stewing on the stove during Christmas time.
Well, the palate is like it's juicy would be the easiest determinant, the easiest term for me to kick things off with right off the bat. Both the barley, the fruit tones, like the oak, all of those elements have this nice creamy coating, juicy character to them.
Hmm. Well, it's so interesting, right? When you go back in history, right? If you pretty much have ever tried a 1966, 67, they were all local barley back then. And then they've kind of gone through these sort of waves over the
Hmm.
years where they kind of started it back up in sort of the mid to late 90s. Then the first sort of big release was that 16-year-old, and then everything else has been in that sort of generally 8 to 11-year-old age range. So
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to see what they've got for stock wise, if they have plans to release something older down the road, or whether we're
Well,
just going to be in that sort of high single, low double digit
yeah,
range.
my recollection is they don't have a lot of this maturing. And part of the reason for it is that the percentage of annual production is quite low. Um, and I even as little as 3 or 4 years ago, I'd heard rumors from people at Springbank that we might not see local barley anymore. And yet every year they seem to keep popping out another release. So that might be why we're seeing like all these younger ones is maybe there's now been a decision. I mean, I think you can't help but take some of these things back to Headley Wright's stewardship, which is now over, which seemed to shift with the tides at times and make decisions that maybe not everyone would have agreed with, but he owned the business, so he made the decisions. You know, my thought it would be that it might have he might have decided that they weren't going to do this anymore because maybe it didn't make sense for ABC reasons. But then as he started to phase out of the business, maybe they were able to make different decisions with Neil and some other people that allowed them to start dabbling in this again. And given that this is an industry where the youngest whiskeys we have here, well, there's a 5-year-old coming up, but these 8-year-olds, these are decisions that would have been made 9 years ago that allowed them to be the way they are today.
That's right. Interestingly, for folks that don't know, Springbank is now owned by Campbelltown, run by a committee, I think of 5 or 6 people, including Reynolds and oh, why am I blanking?
Finley?
Yes, Finley, thank you. Along with a couple of sort of Headley's old sort of right hands with it. But we're already starting to see a little bit of those changes. This year have two different variations of the local barley, which were malted separately, milled, kiln separately, and everything else. So um, it's that along with now adding trademark next to Burnside with some of the Cadenhead releases, adding temperature controlled warehouses, doing the countdown release. There's a whole bunch of changes that are
Mhm.
starting to feel a little bit different than maybe when Headley was fully engaged in the business.
Hmm. Well, and it's funny, over the years, people have said Springbank's increasing production. And I was like, so what? I mean, the baseline they started from was so low, and demand is still so crazy. Now, obviously, some things are finally, at least in Alberta, almost constantly available on the shelf, like Kilkerran 12, like Longrow Peated. But it's still going to be a long time until they have enough inventory that you're going to be able to come into my shop and just pull a bottle of Springbank 10 off the shelf because we don't get a special allocation of it. Um, a lot of retailers in the province will get it, including some that don't even know really how unique it is, so it just gets put on the shelf. Like I've heard tales of people buying it at the airport in Calgary because it's just sitting in the shop there. And I suppose that's good on one level because it rewards the people that go out and hunt for that stuff. But I guess my point is that even with the new direction, I mean, what's their production this year going to be? 300,000 liters?
Yeah, just a little bit more than that. Again, depending if you include Kilkerran in there or not.
Which is still a third of Kilholman. They're only making one third as much whiskey as Kilholman. They're doing it with probably 40 times the employees. And we love them for that because they're sustaining a community. But God damn it, can't they just get to 500,000? Like, there's still probably not going to be enough Springbank to go around at 500,000 liters a year. But anyway,
Indeed. Well, I think we can probably get into some of the release schedules and other things once we make it to our fifth dram of the night with the Longrow 100 proof. But do you want to jump into
touche.
speaking of
Well,
Kilkerran?
do we have no further things to say about Springbank, Longrow,
I'm
or
gonna
sorry,
I'm
the
gonna
Book of Barley?
save my last couple of comments for our lightning round at the end,
Mhm.
which I'm assuming we're gonna do.
Yeah. Now, Doug, because you've spent more time there recently than I have, do you have any comments on Shlomo's question regarding the tasting note? Who TF says basil? Seriously.
Well, again, I'm going to violently agree with Shlomo on so many things tonight. I feel like on all sorts of things, whether it's calling you a tart or calling you out for basil notes or something else
Or
like that.
wondering what's below the median level here?
Well, I mean, listen, you're the one who keeps on bringing up whether you're wearing pants or not. I think you and Shlomo are the only ones, hopefully, thinking about that in any great length. But here we
Uh,
are.
yeah. All right. Kilkerran 8-year-olds. I've got to go to a whole new website for this one.
Well, maybe when you do that, I can talk a little bit about the changes at Springbank. So what
Sure.
they've been doing is this countdown collection where there's 4 or 5 releases. They do sort of a 25, 26, 27-year-old release every year. And allegedly they're doing it at quite a premium, but the money is going back towards a whole bunch of improvements. So they built a couple of temperature controlled warehouses. They've been updating a whole bunch of work with the new bottling hall that they're building right now. The next plan, allegedly, and they were still working through it when I was there in June, um, is looking at doing maltings, standalone maltings for Kilkerran, whether that's a drum or something else on site with it and starting to get away. Again, most of Kilkerran is coming from floor maltings at Springbank. The heavily peated stuff they're bringing in from elsewhere for it, but it'll be quite interesting to see how some of that changes if they start doing their own drum maltings on site as opposed to the floor malting side of things.
Hmm,
And then
interesting.
after drum maltings, the next one after that allegedly is building a new test distillery where I was able to go through Springbank Whiskey School. This is basically you get to go over for 5 days work, and I do mean work with it. Where I've run into a bunch of folks at festivals around the world where they've talked about going in and they actually drop out by sort of Thursday because you're doing heavy lifting for 3 or 4 hours. You're moving casks around, and you're doing all sorts of quite manual labor. And so, depending on your physical fitness, it's going to affect you quite a bit. And like the first day, they don't even give you a dram, for gosh sake. So you get a couple of drams as on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But I mean, if for folks going in who think they're going to be just going and drinking out of casks all day long, that is not the case. But once they do open up this test distillery, the plan allegedly again, and a lot of things can change, is you're going to be able to make whiskey, and then they're going to invite the group back 10 years later to actually be able to bottle the
Hmm,
cask that you distilled on site, which is pretty darn cool.
indeed. All right. I've got the website here, though. Humorously, and this could be the millennial influence in some parts of Springbank today. I'm going to throw Nicole under the bus for this one, but I'll note this website is not properly sized for desktop or laptop computers. It's clearly made for mobile because, like, good Lord, you can't even shrink that if you wanted to. But this is the 2025 8-year-old cask strength. Per the description here, it's a mix of bourbon, port, and sherry casks. The latest release is fully matured in bourbon. So this one here, 55.6% has been fully matured in bourbon. And I think you can see that on the nose. Um, it's only got either 2 out of 4 or 2 out of 5 peat flames. I'm not sure what the exact scale is here, but we'll guess this is 40% peated, would be my guess based on that. But yeah, I think this is awesome, except for I wish it had been sized a little bit better for desktops. But at least they've updated the Kilkerran website. For years they hadn't done anything, so it's quite an improvement.
This is like very like lemon lozenges and fresh
Hmm.
fresh oak for me.
Hmm.
Very,
It's
very malty.
it's very malty. It comes across a lot more youthful than either the Hazelburn or the Springbank.
Mm, very.
Now, Uh, at least up until this point, probably it was the same barley. So Kilholman floor maltings, or sorry, Springbank floor maltings feeding Kilkerran. Moving forward, that's not going to be the case. They're now bringing in commercial malt in order to sustain Kilkerran, at least until they can potentially open a drum maltings, which is still a distant dream. But it's interesting because you've got the same barley, presumably peated to a similar spec to Springbank, and yet, or is it the same spec as Springbank, or does it change?
So, or is there a little bit of heavily peated
Hmm.
Kilkerran that's blended into the sort of Springbank style
Hmm.
um, with it? I, I'm speculating, but
There's some uh, critique of the official tasting notes from at least one corner for us here. Um, all comments, of course, welcome in the chat. Well, let's give this a taste and see where it's at. I still haven't even put liquid to lips yet. Still very malty, very grassy, some firm peat. What's interesting is it does have that kind of old school whiskey mouthfeel that you do get in a lot of Springbank bottlings. And I don't often get that in Kilkerran. I find Kilkerran to be a little bit, I don't know, a little bit cleaner in profile than Springbank. Like that Campbellton funk is not quite as prominent. Um, but I also find it to often be not quite as complex as Springbank either. Now, this is interesting because we've had some other Kilkerrans recently, like the 12, I believe the 16 as well, that just, felt very, very tight. This feels like they've tweaked things in their production there.
mm, trying to think about when Change and Finley came on as the master distiller because I know when I was there a couple of trips ago, he was complaining um, that Frank, the former distiller, was
Bit
not
hardy.
or, yes was not very open with a lot of the recipes and the way that he was distilling. He kind of got trained for a couple of years, and then Frank played golf for the most part. And so as he was trying to replicate some of the triple distilled at Kilkerran, Frank would come in on a rainy day when he couldn't golf and kind of shrug his shoulders and walk out when he was asked any significant questions. And so it's interesting for me as they kind of figure it out on the fly, and each sort of distillery manager puts his mark on things.
Well, we've talked about this before where I kind of feel like Kilkerran being the distillery opened out of spite, which I still love, uh, was perhaps not given as much love or care and attention to detail as goes into Springbank, which is made, rigorously to a specific tradition. And I think there's quite a difference with Kilkerran. So I've always found Kilkerran to be kind of like the less interesting younger brother of Springbank. And it's kind of there, but it's not as good. I mean, I think this is a sign of a bit of improvement because some of those 12s and 16s I just did not find very exciting.
Some of the recent batches of the 16 are absolutely lovely, I thought. With it, the 12s have been a bit more hit and miss, and some of the 8s come and go. So, sorry, is
100%.
Walter bothering you right now?
No, I believe my wife has arrived home and I've sent him up to greet her. He was sleeping. Who
But I
doesn't like
absolutely
being
agree
greeted
with
by a dog? It's one of the greatest things in the world.
I love the grapefruit pith note
Hmm.
in there with it. Definitely some of that lemon and lime notes, a little bit of
Hmm.
ginger. I think this one has got more notes, either because people are loosening up after the third dram, or it's giving you the most flavor forward.
Um, apparently someone feels another person's tasting notes is influenced by their diabetes, which is, well, maybe just leave that comment in the chat where it's at. The interesting thing is I think that this shows a lot of promise. It's coming across a little too youthful for me, but uh, this is the second Kilkerran I've had in the last year where I kind of felt like the whiskey was starting to get better, which is not to say it was bad. It just on the scale of Springbank was kind of not playing on the same field. And this feels like an improvement. But I think, and Doug, you've spent more time there than I have, even though I've been there probably 12 times over the years, but always for just a quick in and out. Um, I
I'm not
wonder if
taking a on that.
I wonder if part of that is just that the no one's really had a firm identity as to what Kilkerran should be because it was literally opened so that Campbellton could become a region and sort of run half-heartedly for the first, I would say, at least 10 to 12 years. So even now, like, do they know what Kilkerran's going to be? You've got the heavily peated, you've got the lightly peated, you've got some unpeated, but like, what is Kilkerran going to be?
One, you've got some triple distilled batches in there, some of the oldest stuff that you can go through if you do the barley to bottle tour, or if you go in and do Springbank Whiskey School. With it, you get to taste the oldest of each one of sort of the four variations of it, and the triple distilled Kilkerran is the oldest that you get to taste.
Hmm.
I don't honestly know what it is, and I think again they've gone through so much trouble where I think they've replaced every single washback at least once because they would leave them dry and then they would rot out and leak when they went in. They always had
Hmm.
challenges in terms of keeping the distillery up and running as they came in. I think they've honed it a lot better, but then that still takes years to fall through on when
Hmm.
you're only making, a couple of months of distillate at best. So I think it's still got a ways to go to find its legs, like so many new distilleries that are coming on the market. What we're trying in the early days is not necessarily what the sort of house style is going to be given some more time.
Hmm. I suppose the last thing that's kind of interesting about that is on the one hand, you could say, yeah, Springbank is a new distiller, or Kilkerran is a new distillery. But I mean, when did it open? Like 2003, 2004, something like that? Like, it's not that young anymore, but it's only ever been run part-time. And that can't be good either because you're not going to have as much consistency if you're not running the place on a regular basis. If you're turning it on every 9 to 10 months for 6 to 8 weeks, you're not going to have, um, the right kind of flow. People don't know the equipment. And so you're going to have a lot of inconsistency.
Very much so. And they're just starting to release some 20-year-old stuff. I think they've had three 20-year-old releases.
Hmm.
One for the festival, one is a warehouse only tasting for the festival time, and then last year for the festival as well, I think was a special 20-year-old release. So
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see what the future holds.
Okay. Well, several people have already jumped ahead of us, so we might as well
Oh,
get our noses around the 1998 vintage, which was bottled this year, 48.3%, 100% sherry, though. Was this full term maturation in sherry or was this finished in sherry?
I believe it was full term.
Yeah.
Wrong on that.
So don't see anything to discredit that. I'm not going to go on to whiskey base to fact check it. 48.3%. I love the Rundlets and Kilderkins label. That textured semi-metallic label is a nice touch. Would like to see that crop up in a few more bottlings, though I'm sure it does wonders for those working in the bottling hall.
Mm. So, a couple of great tips. So, I know Clay sent me a note saying he was going to be out in August for whiskey school. But whether you're going for whiskey school or just in general, a couple of tips for those going to Campbelltown. There's a little pub very close by to the distillery called the Burnside. Cadenhead owns and Springbank owns the trademark for Burnside. So, you're going to see less and less Balvenie bottled as Burnside. A couple of folks are starting to call it Sideburn with it, but going in and buying a couple of pints inside of there is always very much appreciated, especially if you get a couple folks in the bottling hall. There's one gentleman, Chris, who's a vegetarian but has a large steak tattoo on him uh, that sort of runs the show. And if you go in there, Chris has a
Is
special bar.
is he a millennial?
Yes, very much so.
That all checks. Steak tattoo, vegetarian.
Yeah, we're checking a whole bunch of boxes, but
Yeah.
Clay, when you're there or others that go there, if you can walk into sort of the bottling hall, which is sort of in the back by the parking lot, with it, Chris, who's sort of the head of it, holds back all of the partially filled bottles with it, and always has one or two others, and so there's always some amazing stuff. So when I was there, getting to spend a day, because when you go through whiskey school, you spend sort of a half day doing each step of the process, and so bottling is one of them. And so at the end of the bottling, you get to go in and try a bunch of stuff. And they had just finished bottling this and had it. So we were very fortunate to be able to enjoy this and a couple of other absolutely magical drams. But Chris is one of those people that you definitely want to bribe at Springbank
Mhm.
if given the
Mhm.
chance. So
And a maple handy goes a long ways in that regards as well, does it not?
it does. So I always go over with a can of maple syrup and lovingly call it maple handies. Although for some
Well,
reason they always laugh over there like it means something else. I
it's
don't
like when you have a folded or rolled up bill in your hand and you go to shake the bouncer at the bar's hand, but really you're transferring him a bribe. It's kind of like that, but with more sexual innuendo.
Well, listen, I'm always happy to trade straight up some of Canada's finest liquid for some of Scotland's finest. So
There you go. Well, as some people have been commenting on the chat, the nose on this is lovely. Tropical fruits, nice, like subtle salted caramel tones. A lot of dried dark fruits like raisins and dates and figs. A nice note, the smoke is faded quite a bit, but uh, partly that's age, partly that's going to be the sherry casts as well, toning that note down.
well, and the interesting thing is Springbank's going through a real change in terms of what their official lineup is. And so this is going to be kind of the first of a number of vintages that are going to be released because I don't think we're going to see very much of the 25 anymore. I believe the Longrow 21 and the Hazelburn 21 are done. The Hazelburn 10 has sort of been pretty sporadic at best. Um, there is a lot of these changes. We're starting to see sort of, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they increased production. So we're starting to see more of the Longrow 100 proof. There were two of the Springbank Society 5-year-olds, sort of the bourbon and the sherry bomb ones that had come out. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to manage their stock as we're getting in sort of past that post 2000 timeframe when they sold off so many of their casks.
Mhm.
But this is absolutely lovely. So
Yeah, the palate on this is lovely too. Again, very tropical, like a barrel-aged maple syrup note in there, like a tiny bit smoky, but it's got that nice sweetness to it. More of those dried dark fruits, but also some candied ones as well. There's a lot going on in this. Some great notes in the chat there too. Great length on the 98. Love the mouth feel. Feels like coated in dark chocolate. And I do know Vi does like to have a little dark chocolate with her whiskey, so just doubling down on that chocolate there. Chad, tropical fruit, overripe mango, banana, lots of other great notes in there. And yeah, lovely whiskey. I'm privileged this is the second time I've had the chance to try it. We only received two bottles of this in our shop, and we poured both of them in a tasting, as we are wont to do. So,
Mm. No, there's a beautiful tropic, sort of almost acidic note to it that I get that's just absolutely lovely. That
mhm,
these are pretty old, well used sherry casks, it feels like, in order to be able to get a beautifully balanced whiskey at this age.
mhm. Well, I mean, I think one of the things Frank McCarty did a good job of, and I think he got there around 92 or 94, is he really kind of corrected the oak program there, which had been suffering for a long time, which is not to say that he put everything in sherry, but he got them to start thinking about and buying and investing in good sherry casks. And the reason I know this is that in 2010, 2011, Kensington got to bottle a 1996 Oloroso cask and then a 1996 Manzanilla cask. And I still remember the tasting. The first tasting we did to select them was in the old Cadenhead tasting room in Campbellton, which was like kind of this weird room in a courtyard behind the shop. And they brought in six full-size bottles of Springbank 96, all different types of sherry casks: Fino, Manzanilla, Amontillado, Oloroso, PX. And we got to pick our favorite. And one of the guys in that group actually took notes about all the casks we tried. And then a year later, we got a chance to buy a second. That time they sent us the samples to the shop. We picked them there. And our pick that year was our second choice when we were in that Cadenhead's tasting room a little over a year earlier. And it was the Manzanilla that we'd skipped on to do the Oloroso. And I remember at that time, they were really proud of these sherry casks they had because they had put a lot of money into it and a lot of time into it in the mid 90s to have some good products. And in some ways, Doug, this is way ahead of the curve because you don't start hearing about Palo Cortado or Manzanilla or all these other types of sherry casks until really about 5 to 10 years ago. And almost all of it since then has been finishes because these aren't things that people thought about putting in these casks for long maturations. This is stuff that they did a quick finish on so that they could just put that on the label.
Yeah. Well, and especially in cases like Palo Cortado, it's sort of a nice happy accident in Sherryland. But
Hmm.
I think the wood program has just got so much better.
Hmm.
Sort of those late 90s, I think they were still working through reusing some casks that maybe still had some sulfur candles or some other issues involved with them. But I think generally speaking, it's really lovely to see. And some of the vintages of the 15-year-old over the last 4 or 5 years have just been absolutely stunning, I think.
Hmm. The we like to blame all those bad casks on Mark Wright, Headley's nephew, who's no longer with the business, who also may or may not have been responsible for a lot of the crown jewels getting sold off, um, perhaps a little cheaply. But he was a
But
lovely guy.
and I think his collection is now displayed in the shop. There's pretty legendary
Oh,
uh,
I'm sure.
collection of Headley's nephew is what it was described to me as. That
Yeah,
that has some absolutely stunning vintages. So
no doubt. Shall we move on to the 100 proof, the Longrow?
indeed.
So I'm going to pop this one up on screen for everybody. The backstory on this one is uh, 5 years old, I believe, according to the label. Brand new to the range. Uh, they're 100 proof, sort of a nod back to the 100 proof bottlings that we used to see from them prior to about 10 years ago. Uh, Refill bourbon and refill Pinot Noir casks. The whiskey was matured almost 4 years in refill bourbon and 2 years in refill Pinot Noir casks. Now, uh, Doug, I don't know about you, but I was never really a fan of that Longrow red range. In fact, I would go so far as to say I think those are some of the worst Springbanks ever bottled. And I'm not just judging them by that. I think it's pretty clear. I don't like wine casks most of the time anyway. And a lot of those wine casks were wet fills. Now, a quick look at this would tell you this doesn't look like a wet fill. So they might have got around one of those problems, but that Longrow Red, the name in it was kind of a nod to the fact that the wine casks had turned the whiskeys red. And I'm assuming we know they didn't rinse them, but it's because those casks were probably wet filled as well.
Very much so. I know Harmony in your shop is or was a massive fan of the Longrow Reds.
I think she's matured a
Uh,
little bit.
Well, regardless, I might disagree with you on that, but regardless, I think it's one of those where they've discontinued Longrow Red. And so I
Mhm.
wonder now that Longrow 100 proof is going to be sort of one of their core ranges, are they trying to use up some of the sort of leftover wine casks that they had now that they've stopped filling them? Or is this something that's going to be a bit more permanent?
Well, I mean, and I think the other side to this is, I mean, I have to imagine this is a refill Pinot Noir cask. So they're calling it Pinot Noir, but it's probably been dumped and then refilled. Uh, Possibly one of the latter Longrow Reds was emptied and then used to finish this. I mean, good oak is good oak, and wine seasoned oak can be good oak in certain circumstances, but I think a lot of it comes down to how it's treated. And I think the Scotch industry as a whole has gotten a lot better about using wine casks in the last 5 years. I think they've realized that you just can't wet fill them. You've got to do something to get rid of that residual wine, and also the risk of that cask spoiling, which is I think one of the other reason some of those whiskeys are so dreadful is I quite frankly think the casks have been spoiled before they even get around to putting whiskey in them.
Well, and so much of that, I think over the last, 10 years, 15 years especially, is just as the market has shifted, right? Bourbon barrels were plentiful and sherry barrels were plentiful sort of decades ago. We saw production rise significantly. And now I think I just sent you a note just in the last couple of days about a BBC article talking about how there's actually a plethora of bourbon barrels coming out of the US now that are available, and prices are dropping for bourbon and sherry barrels. And so it'll be interesting to see sort of the distinction that distilleries are choosing to fill up barrels with moving forward.
Well, and yeah, will some of these marginal cask types continue to be explored when they have other, some might argue, better options? I mean, interesting other side to that, Doug, that inspired me to write a one-page article about how the cycles in the whiskey industry have impacts outside the industry. And in the other case in that article you sent me was farmers. Farmers in Scotland are now losing money on their barley crops. Like the price dropped so low for barley this year that it's below their cost to produce it. And that's, I mean, the sad thing is this isn't new. You look at like Ben Riach, which is shut for 2 years, as we both learned through that article, and isn't exactly public knowledge, but that's not new. Ben Riach has been closed more years than it's been open since it was founded in 1898. All you have to do is add up the math, and it's like it's been closed 60 to 65% of the time since it was built.
Yeah, it'll always be Longmorn number two in my heart, first of all. But yes, I
Fair.
think this is it. At the end of it, I think if we look back, generally we're in 40-year cycles, right? But
Mhm.
going all the way back to the Pattison brother crash. Then 40 years
Mhm.
later, there was an anomaly with the Second World War where distilleries were forced to shut down. But I mean, in the 1930s, we were down to what, 16 distilleries that were
Mhm.
operating in Scotland. Only three of them were allowed to operate for the entirety of the Second World War. Then
Mhm.
40 years after that, in 1983, we saw a huge number of shutdowns. And now we're coming in where Every single major drinks company has changed over their CEO in
Yeah.
the last 12 months. And Diageo, the largest, has a new gentleman who's taking over on January 1st, who has a history of very deep cuts. And so
Yeah.
I think, again, it's a fascinating time in terms of, we've seen a ramp down in production on a whole bunch of fronts, but are we going to see shutdowns, sales, winding down of brands, distilleries, or other things? It's going to be very fascinating to see.
Yeah, I believe the term they use for him is he's a turnaround specialist, which generally means like button down the hatches, like cut all the sheets that are causing drag on the boat, and like, let's get moving. I think the sad part about this, and Doug, this is a Springbank tasting. We didn't want to make this about the industry as a whole,
Sorry.
but no, but it's an interesting point because I think a lot of the new distilleries that are really just limping by right now, I think a lot of them are hanging on in the hopes that one of these big guys is going to buy them out. And none of these big guys have any cash at the moment. Like they're all in a bad spot. And I think that's the saddest part about this is there's going to be a bit of a bloodbath. And it might still take another couple of years for it to fully play out, but it's yeah, it's going to be tough.
Well, after the 70s of intermittent distilling, the 80s where they were, a handful of years at Springbank distilling at all, even in
Mhm.
the mid 2000s when Headley didn't distill for a year or two because out of protest for barley prices being too high. I
Yeah.
think, in chatting with the folks at Springbank, they're really, really mindful, having learned the lessons from, the
Yeah.
80s, 90s, 2000s of how they want to continue to make their business sustainable, and be able to continue to provide jobs locally for
Yeah.
locals in Campbelltown.
But devil's advocate on this to you, Doug.
Go.
Could they do that, but still make about 30 to 50% more?
It depends. Again, there's an asterisk there, right? The reason that Frank McHardy came back was because their distiller in the early 90s was trying to create efficiencies. So the short answer is yes, they could, but I think if you want to stay true to being completely manual and allowing them to keep the same joke that I've heard every single time I am there, which is in where they store the barley with
Is it about the computer?
the computer, which is their chalkboard that they write down and they have their little chuckle every single time. So
Doug, this is why I can't tour distilleries anymore, including Springbank. Like I can walk through them, but I cannot be with a guide. I cannot hear an explanation one more time. One more
the
time.
wonderful thing that Clay's about to learn is once you go to Springbank Whiskey School, you get a high vis vest. And so this allows you to walk through the distillery and actually tour your own folks through.
Hmm.
So if you want to come with me, I will happily, for the low price of only £100 per tour, give you a personal tour of Springbank Distillery, sir.
So, Doug, has there ever been an instance of them revoking someone's high-vis vest for taking advantage of the privileges it bestows?
I tell you, I'm going to push that as far as I can to see. Again, part of my charm was I showed up multiple days early on the malting floors to turn malt over and above while my schoolmates were out having breakfast. So I feel like I got a little bit of extra love for that.
We're really getting stuck into the weeds here, but um, would would they allow you to just randomly go into the warehouse on your own with a Valanche and start pouring drams? Like, where does the privilege end?
Depends on how many maple handies I hand out, my
Oh,
friend.
that's fair. That is also fair. Well, last comment on the Longrow before we move on. I think Tom or Vi put this in the chat. It really bursts on the palate with a little bit of time, a lot of fruit, a lot of lovely distillate character. And I might add, the smoke on this is very faint. And I think this is something I think is fascinating about Springbank is just how inconsistent the peating levels are, even within the three designated profiles that they have.
Very much so.
All right. Long row and 100 proof. Very tasty. All right. We're going back to Kilkerran. So I got to switch websites again. Um, Back to the one that's not properly sized for desktops. We are on to the heavily peated. Hopefully they have the right batch here. They've got batch 13. Well, we're on batch 12. Oh, wait, do they have 12? I don't think they do. Well, I'm going to put batch 12 up on the screen here and I'll tell you, or batch 13, I'll tell you about batch 12. So here is batch 12. We do now know that the peating scale is 5 flames, is fully peated. So very scientific there. Kilkerran heavily peated batch 12 looks to be about 90% bourbon, 10% sherry, 58.4%. And Doug, the official tasting notes, which some people have poo-pooed in our tasting tonight, talk of Parma violets, which gets me excited because now we're talking Bowmore. But I don't know. I might see a little touch of Bowmore on the nose there.
I mean, we might be stretching a little bit on that. For me, it's like almost like a sour macadamia nut. I don't know how quite to describe it.
Mm. Or a macadamia nut butter and jam sandwich.
Yeah. Well, and again, we have to remember a couple things here, right? So in the early 2000s, around 2002, they moved from Campbelltown
Wow.
peat into a Highland sort of Inverness Tomintoul style of peat. And then in the case of the heavily peated, this is not floor malted um, Springbank sort of malt. This is brought in where they've got a heavily malted sort of spec from a drum maltster, a proper maltster. So a little bit different than what we might have seen with the earlier Kilkerran 8-year-old.
Mhm. Now, I have to admit, I was initially nosing the wrong whiskey, but I'm back on the right one now. I'd enthusiastically jumped ahead to the final whiskey, the ultimate whiskey, but we are on the penultimate whiskey right now.
Mm,
Um, and it does have kind of like a peanut butter, like a smoked peanut butter nose to it. It makes you wonder, are these Jim Beam casks? The most
interesting.
peanutty of bourbons.
I'm shocked that you're even giving bourbon notes, considering I think I've been in at least 3 different text chats this week alone where you were giving your very strong opinions of
Less than charitable. About everybody but Michter's, to be fair. I've got lots of love for Michter's.
interesting. So as I was trying to goad you into comparing some of the more notorious distillates in Scotland versus some of the best bourbons out there, but you didn't take the bait, unfortunately.
Not gonna fall for that one. I mean, the palate on this is quite nice too. I would have to imagine that this is sub 10-year-old whiskey. So like that Kilkerran 8-year-old we had before, this is newer distillate than the 16s or the 12s that we're seeing because it has a bit more of that Campbelltown, Springbank, old school feel to it. It's distinctly not Springbank though, and I think you can see that on the palate. But yeah, I've struggled with Kilkerran for years. Doug, I don't know if you remember that set of 6 10-year-olds they released. Uh, Most of them I thought were almost undrinkable. Like they were just not great. But the heavily peated series I've had a bit more forgiveness for, partly because the peat helps to mask some of those flaws, some of the rougher edges in younger new make spirits. And yeah, I like this, but it's still very, very young. There's a gasoline note on the nose that I just got.
The heavily peated, I feel is very batchy, but some of my favorite Kilkerran have been some of the 16 batches and some of the
Mhm,
heavily peated ones, which are generally around 8-ish years old, if memory
mhm.
serves. But I think
Yeah,
this is ultimately listed as an NAS.
yeah. There's some nice fruit on that. I didn't check yield whiskey base, but I suppose I could. Um, Anything more we want to say about Kilkerran before we move on to the last whiskey, the Longrow palate killer almost of a whiskey that
No,
uh just checking, I do not see an age statement on the Kilkerran heavily peated batch 12. All right. Shall we all move on to the Longrow?
Oh, what
So,
a long
Doug,
row.
you've you feel this one is improved.
So I feel like this is one of those whiskeys where we start to really understand where people's palates are, right? So there are some that prefer a very naked type of distillate. There are some that have a I don't even know if a sulfur sensitivity is the right word, but even like a flintiness in there, because I don't know if this is if there's sulfur on here, if this is more of a flint note for me. Personally, I love some of that stuff. We've got a mutual friend, Wojtek, who's notoriously loves his sulfur.
Yes.
Again, there's a difference between cask sulfur and sulfur that you get from sort of the wort and the yeast that you're using with it. But I think oxygen has been very kind to this. You were very kind to give me a little bit in a very large glass, or the left of the bottle. So have been given a number of weeks to oxidize, and I think some time has really been able to even it out
Mhm.
in a way that's quite lovely.
So, the comment about sulfur is an interesting one because I don't think that there's a sulfur taint on this whiskey at all. I do think it's like over the top sherry, like massively over the top. I would say it's on the verge of being overcooked, but I still think it's drinkable. The nose on it is challenging. Like I think the nose is not the best part of this whiskey. Um, but the palate on this, I think, more than makes up for it. Now, why is the nose this way? So we didn't really touch on it. Unfortunately, this is not on their website any longer. So I'm going to put it up on Whiskey Base, where sadly the photo put up is not the best product photography we've seen recently. But there gives you a bit of an idea of it. In fact, I don't know that that really even does it justice. I'm going to take that down. I'm going to put this up. So while I'm talking, you can see my 375 ml bottle on the screen there. Doug's got his empty previous bottle. Now, 23 years in refill Oloroso butts, and then finished for 3 years in fresh Pedro Jimenez hogsheads. Now, that's kind of an interesting recipe. Like you're starting in refill Oloroso, and then you're finishing in Pedro Jimenez hogsheads. Now, that intense nuttiness, that real like leathery, meaty profile, where is that coming from? Is that the refill butts that it started in, or is that the Pedro Jimenez sherry that it finished in?
So I have a theory on this.
Let's
And
hear your
again,
theory, Doug.
this theory is worth exactly how much you're paying for it. So feel free to ignore me, as I'm sure
I
most of
believe it was a tasting kit is the exact amount paid for your expertise.
exactly, which I always appreciate. For me, I think generally at a whiskey this age, you don't want to go in and finish it in something. And so I think my theory is that they let this sit in the casks for a little bit long, and they started getting a little scared. And so for me, it's almost like the not necessarily like flint or matchsticks. It's almost like sort of what you're striking on the match box um, with it, where they took it, they got a little bit scared, they put it in sort of a fresh PX butt, I'm assuming, or two, something that probably wasn't overly wet, but certainly imparted some influence just to try and round it out a little bit. And so
Mhm.
I think part to answer your question, part of this richness we're getting from the PX side of things, but I think the depth that's inside of there and that flintiness that
Mhm.
at least I'm getting out of it is probably coming from some of those original Oloroso casks.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And uh, I think the challenge is that the aromas people get on the nose in this that they associate with sulfur is not actually the sulfur, but it's the type of sherry casks that were more frequently sulfured than not, which are these extremely dry, really nutty, I would say fairly meaty sherry casks. And while I understand that why people draw that comparison, I think there's a difference there. And I personally, I've been sipping on one of these bottles for a while. I've poured it in a couple of tastings, and I've really kind of been back and forth about this. We poured it at the Quake Springbank tasting we did a while back. I firmly believe this is not sulfured. I think this is just a really meaty sherry style whiskey that, to Doug's point, they managed to soften and sweeten up a little bit with a short finishing in PX sherry. Because I mean, I see the comment in there, like, I get sulfur, should have been bottled 5 to 10 years ago. If it was sulfured, it would have been sulfured 5 to 10 years ago. I don't think um, it would have been any better, at 20 years of age or 16 years of age than it is now. But we've seen a lot of this, which is this really, really nutty, dry sherry that was historically associated with these sulfur tones.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that statement. I completely disagree with the some of the comments from Shlomo and David in the chat right now. But generally, I think it's a
I
great
did,
jam.
they're saying to bring Doug back, but I don't think you ever left.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I've ever should have been here in the first place, but again, it's probably a discussion for another time. So
Well, I want to talk about the palate on this before we move on. As Tim said, the viscosity on this is great. It's got this nice old school sherry feel to it underneath the weight of that sweet PX. You can see the leather, the tobacco, the tannins from that really dry Oloroso on the palate. But I think, yeah, overall, I think this is a lovely whiskey. And we should add, what is cool about this is the oldest Longrow ever bottled.
Indeed, and I think not only that, it's super cool that Springbank's in the spot right now where they're doing these not only 750 700 ml bottles, but 350s and in the odd case 250 ml bottles to be able to spread it out so everybody gets to try some at
Mhm.
different price points and availability,
Yeah.
which I very much appreciate. So
Yeah. Well, and I think it's they've managed, especially with the Springbank Society, to actually look after a high proportion of their engaged members by doing things like this too. Because even if they'd only put out those 700 mils of this, the price, which was not unreasonable, especially when you compare it to like Springbank 30, some other releases that are out there, or the Countdown collection, uh, $900 and change is a lot of money for most people for a bottle of whiskey. Putting that in a half-size bottle and having the price definitely made it, I think, a more approachable for a lot of people. So even with the premium bottlings, I think Doug, despite the odd pointed remark about how the business was managed, which is not my decision, nor is it yours. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I think anytime anyone's frustrated about Springbank, it's because they love it. It's not because they don't like the distillery, it's because they love it and they just want more of it. And they're like me, they're frustrated that that's not possible.
well, and it's just so quirky and so weird
Yeah.
where some of the best whiskey I've had in my life is easily Springbank, and there's the odd bottle in there that's included in some of the worst whiskey that I've ever had. And
Well,
that's the
yeah.
idiosyncrasies of it all. So
Well, and I mean, one of the odd ones was that Headley Wright made sure that all his salespeople had an Audi up until a certain point of time. Like they didn't start with like what do they call it, a Fiat Punto or something like that, or a Nissan Micra. No, they got an Audi. Like if you're going to be driving around the UK for Headley, you're going to do it in at least a half decent car. So Mazel tov
uh,
to the old Hesley Wright. All right, Doug, speed round, lightning round, whatever we want to call it. We're back to that Hazelburn Oloroso 8 year, and how is it faring on the nose?
so much sweeter now
Hmm.
going back to it versus when we started off, it feels like.
Still full of jujubes for me though,
Yeah. Still, I get much more sort of like those almonds with a little bit of like cocoa powder on them or something else like
like
that.
Marcona almonds, like the naked ones.
Um, sure. I don't know if I've ever had those before, but I'll loosely agree with you.
Oh, just got to pop into the neighbor peasant and get some Marcona almonds. You won't be disappointed.
Mm.
Um, Springbank local barley. Still so yogurty. It's like yogurt with honey and granola.
Again, I think, Springbank local barleys, are some of the most sought after bottles out there for a number of different reasons. But for me, they're so challenging, right? Like I,
Mm,
I think they're not necessarily at sort of the top of the Springbank list, but I so appreciate when I'm able to have one, especially in comparison to other Springbanks,
mm,
because it just really is allowed to shine some of those crazy notes that you wouldn't otherwise get
mhm,
where you've got this higher protein, lower starch and sugared sort of barley, harder to manage. Generally,
mhm,
this is why people don't use it, but just creates such a unique sort of
mhm.
distillate.
Well, and I mean, to go back to that, Doug, it's kind of like Brook Laddie using the Isla barley. Like Isla barley is not the best barley for making whiskey from. It's hard to work with. The sugar yields are low. Then you got the bloody barnacled geese that come in and eat half of it. Like it's not commercially viable unless somebody really wants it. And I think it's probably the same about Campbellton. Like Campbellton is not prime barley growing region in Scotland. It's too wet. It's too exposed to that like cool Atlantic wind. I know it's not really all that cold because it means that it rarely gets all that cold in Campbellton, but it also never really gets all that warm either.
No, very much so. But this, for me, going back to it now, the palate is just completely sort of like a fresh Icelandic yogurt with some fresh
Mm.
honey and granola on top of it. That's just absolutely lovely, I think.
I've never had Icelandic yogurt. Does that mean it's made from sheep's yogurt or mare's yogurt?
That's a great question. I just know that all the millennial kids that I talk to these
Oh,
days, they're not saying 6-7 to me. They're talking about Icelandic yogurt. So
yeah, 6-7, right?
just stop, please. It's banned in my house. I shouldn't have even said anything.
Well, I think we got a few people doing
Oh
this
no,
now.
David, stop. Shlomo, no. I liked you
I
guys
have to
so
admit,
much
I wouldn't
before.
know what 6-7 was if it were not for South Park. So there you go. Uh, Kilkerran, 8-year-old, cask strength, bourbon matured. It's a bit more floral now. Like it reminds me of what's that? Is it broom, that yellow plant that grows wildly all over parts of Scotland?
For me, it's almost like a super underripe pineapple,
Mm,
like in some sort of like floral shop.
nice texture to it. As we know, it's only 2 flames out of 5, but you do see a little bit of smoke on the palate. I like that bourbon cask influence there. It's quite pretty, but I don't know. I'd like a little bit more Campbellton funk out of that guy.
Mm.
Springbank 98 vintage.
Oh,
The
oh, the
nose on
nose
that's
on that
very
is just
pretty.
is beautiful. Yeah.
It's kind of like this tart jam, like a tart dark berry jam.
Oh, well, after you, it's my favorite tart of the night for
Mm,
sure.
well, that's appreciated. It's a good thing I may or may not have pants on, Doug.
Stop, please, for the love of God. Um, no, that
Longrow,
the,
Longrow. What's that?
I was just about to say that the nose on that I actually think um I enjoy more than the palate almost. The palate's just again these old whiskeys, especially the more naked ones, are so delicate that a little bit of oxygen and time can really change them. But the nose is just stunning, I think.
The nose is spectacular. The palate's good.
Yep.
I'm glad we opened the 2 bottles we have because I think it gave people a chance to try them. But I'm not regretting that I don't have one of those.
Mm.
Longrow 100 proof, no longer red.
Again, I'm super excited that this is going to be generally available. I don't know what it means for the what was the Longrow non-vintage envy, whether
No,
that
it's the
still stick
Longrow peated now.
Longrow peated,
Just Longrow
um,
peated.
whether both of them coexist in the world together with it. I have to admit, I still don't love the winey notes in there. I think it's probably the thing I
Mhm.
pick out the most of not loving it, but still a very solid dram and one that I would always love to have open on my shelf.
Well, and I would say it's a lot better than I thought it was going to be after I read Pinot Noir Cask.
Mm.
So
Well,
apologies out there.
the
Sorry?
thing I appreciate the most is just I think this is the least I've ever heard you rant about wine casks, which is not to say you didn't at all. You
No.
still gave it a pretty good run, but
There
still.
was there was still a little bit of a rant there, but not a lot of a rant. And then the Kilkerran heavily peated batch 12.
That's so interesting for such a young whiskey. Like that's one of those ones that I feel like I could go back to throughout the night and
Hmm.
hold something slightly different.
Yeah.
There's a sourness in the palate that is just really fascinating to me.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah,
Okay. The final. And before anyone logs off, don't log off yet because I do have, I think as I alluded to in the email today, a bit of a surprise, but I'll ask you to hang in there for a couple more minutes. So back to that Longrow 26-year-old one last time.
again, it's the opposite of the 98 vintage for me.
Hmm.
I don't love the nose as much, but getting into the palate, it's I think it's quite nice and complex. Again, probably not for everybody's palate, but for me, I quite enjoy it.
It's very tarry. The interesting thing with this is like I think that this would appeal to some people that like certain styles of rum, especially certain styles of like old Demerara rum, because it's got this just really nice, rich coffee, cocoa, toffee thing going on the palate.
Yeah, no, it very much feels like an old Port Moran
Hmm.
from Guyana or something else like that. That's maybe even been had a little bit of molasses added to the cask,
Hmm.
20, 30 years ago, but can just be quite spectacular.
Yeah. Okay. So before we wrap, before we do maybe a straw poll for votes, because Evan did not create this tasting for me, so I don't have a pre-made poll to collect your votes. So what I will say is if you do want to share your top two or three, put them in the chat. Try to keep them in a single thread so that they don't appear in some kind of random sequence. But yeah, please feel free to let us know what your three favorite whiskeys are from the lineup tonight. Before Doug and I get to ours, and I will put him on the spot to go first because I have to talk and fill a bit of space here. I did promise in the email I have a special kind of treat, a reason for you to join the tasting tonight, and it is this. I have a limited amount of two Springbanks and one Kilkerran to sell by ballot tonight. And no, that I do not have the vintage or the local barley, but I do have, I believe, 12-year-old cask strength, maybe Springbank 10, and I've got a little bit of Kilkerran 16 in the non-traditional bottle. The way we're going to handle this is if you want any of these bottles, you're going to send me an email tonight and say, I took part in the tasting, and I will know that you took part in the tasting. Most of you should have my email at scotchguy@kensingtonwinemarket.com. And then I have one other thing. Well, technically two. I have, I believe, two bottles of the half size Longrow 26-year-old left, and I have one of the full size left. So what I'm saying is email me. I will send you an email tomorrow with what's available, and you can tell me what you're interested in. And then based on the feedback I get back from that, I'll figure out who gets what. And if I have to draw names for certain things at that point, I will. I'm not going to create a ballot for it because I have too many of those in my life at this point, and I hate them. But you will need to email me back before Friday, and then we'll figure this all out. So you need to be a Springbank Society member. You need to send me an email, and then I'll send you back a list of what's available based on what's sitting in my office right now. But that's your Christmas special surprise for actually tuning into the tasting tonight. It is not available for those who did not tune in. And I know Clay Blaney left early, so out of respect for him actually tuning in, I will email him as well. But everybody else is SOL, as the kids say.
Well, two things, Andrew. First of all, that's really exciting. Excited for you to try and figure out between everybody who gets what. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Second of all, I'm horribly insulted as somebody who only celebrates Festivus that you would isolate Christmas in the merriment that you wished everybody, but still.
Well, it's a Christmas, Hanukkah, Festivus, Kwanzaa surprise.
Oh, beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
when we have our feats of strength later around the aluminum pole, we'll truly figure this out between the two,
Well, I've got a lot of grievances to air this year, Doug. So I think we'll be starting off with the airing of grievances.
as one always should.
All right, so people are putting their favorites into the chat. Before I start skimming through them, Doug, what are your favorites in tonight's lineup?
So I think it's a really interesting one. It's a bit of an uneven fight, right? Where we've got two 20-something-year-old Springbanks, Longrow and a Springbank. So for me, the nose of the 1998 vintage is so beautiful. It's probably in one of my top five noses of the year, which says a lot. I've had a couple of drams this year, as the kids would say.
Well
Uh,
done.
Six or seven with it. So I would probably put that first, even though the palate didn't quite live up to the nose. The Longrow 26 I think is absolutely lovely for sort of the opposite reasons. I love the palate and finish and find it super complex. After that, I think the two honorable mentions that I have are probably the heavily peated, but if I had to choose a number three, it would probably be the local barley. I think just that sort of
Mhm.
yogurty, honeyed sort of note and mouthfeel was quite lovely. What about yourself?
You're really digging the millennial breakfast dram, essentially. A little bit of granola, a little bit of honey, a little bit of Scandinavian mare yogurt.
Again, I feel like you've described me in so many ways.
Yeah. Um, I'm gonna go. I that long row is my favorite. I agree. The nose on that Springbank 98 is spectacular. The palate's good. I just think it falls short. Whereas I mean, as you said, the nose on the long row is maybe not the best, but as much as I enjoy a good nose, I prefer a good palate. So the long row takes the edge for that. I'm actually going to exclude the 98 from my favorites, um, for the reason that I feel the palate just falls short, and I don't think it's as good a value as that long row. I'm going to go local barley second favorite and Hazelburn Oloroso 8-year-old third favorite.
Wow.
I I like the Kilkerrans, but I again can't help but feel that it's Springbank light. And I generally am not a fan of anything with the word light behind it.
Absolutely fair. I mean,
Yeah.
I disagree with you on half of it, but it's absolutely fair.
Rightly so. Well, scanning through it, we've got, oh, look at that. Frederica liked the Longrow cast strength, our 100 proof, the best, followed by the Hazelburn and the heavily peated. Who else has got one here? Shlomo doesn't want anything. Okay, that's a bit of propaganda, I think. JC saying Longrow 26, 98 and local barley. Um, Tom and Vi have Vi's favorite is the Longrow. Tom's favorite is the local barley. And then Tom's second favorite is the Longrow 26, and Vi's second favorite is the Springbank. I think she means 98, not the 30 year. What else have we got here? Shlomo's got grievances. I love that. Who doesn't have grievances? Especially the older you get, the more grievances you get. I think that's just life in a nutshell for you. Shlomo's favorite R67. Okay, we'll take that. Long Road 26 for Tim Westwood, followed by the 98 and the Hazelburn for three. Ryan goes for the 98, followed by the Hazelburn. Seeing that there are a lot of love for the 98, fair bit for the long row,
Yeah.
including and Steve Bloomer's going long row 8. I think he means the long row 100 proof or the Kilkerran 8. Either way, we've had some drams. Doesn't really matter. Um, 98, the vintage. You know what? I think it looks like the 98 vintage wins. If I had to declare a winner based on the random rambling poll that was the chat, it looks like the 98 is the winner.
I
Well,
I
Doug, go
feel
ahead.
like David was a bit conflicted there. He's like, oh, could it be the 98? Could it be the long row? He just kept on doing this. So I
Could it
just
be?
he was trying to balance the two
Well, I
of them.
think you're doing Kilkerran Longrow gets you
Oh,
to that 6-7 again. So
oh, you're not you weren't supposed to say it. You've ruined the joke now,
I
Andrew.
think we've ruined it, but I love how whatever our generation is has ruined 6-7 for the kids.
Oh, we've ruined so much for the world.
Well, we've got more ruining to do. Well, Doug, I want to thank you very much for helping me with this tasting tonight. Thanks for taking it on. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed the tasting. I look forward to a confusing, rambling sort of emails in my inbox tomorrow morning. And I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus for the rest of us, Kwanzaa, New Year's, all that stuff. Wish you all the best in 2026 and look forward to chatting with you about whiskey again in the new year. So,
Thanks all.
Slange, everybody.
Solange.